Hi, I'm Druella. At my sister's promotion party, surrounded by champagne glasses and fake smiles, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "Your plate's outside, with the dogs." No one stood up, not even my mother. But that wasn't the part that broke me. It was everything that came after: the edited photos, the silent phone calls, the erased name on documents I once signed with pride. And the worst part? They didn't forget me. They replaced me. On purpose. But I brought a gift that day, and when I placed it on the table, the entire room went quiet. Too quiet. Before we begin, tell me, have you ever walked into a room and realized they'd already decided you didn't belong? I arrived exactly 18 minutes late. The kind of late that would have once earned me a playful nudge from Dad or a mock eye roll from Grandma. But tonight, no one even noticed. The rooftop of the Harborview Club was glowing in soft champagne lighting. Jazz spilled from the overhead speakers, mingling with the clink of crystal and the rustle of chiffon. Everyone was dressed like they'd been waiting for this moment their whole lives. I tightened the grip on the small gift bag in my hand, a plain brown square, inside it a framed photo of Dad, Callista, and me from the backyard barbecue in '98. He was laughing, holding a burger, and Callista's braces were gleaming. My hand had been on her shoulder. Now no one even said my name. I scanned the long white tables covered in gold runners, calligraphy name cards tucked into crystal holders. I found Uncle Ray and Guest, Lena, Mrs. Albright, even one that just said HR Dept, but not mine, not even a Drew. My heels clicked softly as I passed the bar, where a server smiled politely and asked if I'd like a mimosa. I shook my head. From where I stood, I could see Callista glowing under the arch of roses and camera flashes, her champagne silk dress catching every ounce of light, her signature smile turned up to 11. She was surrounded by co-workers, our cousins, even a few faces from high school. Her voice rose like a bell, announcing punchlines I couldn't hear. I stood beside the drinks table for nearly 10 minutes. No one came over. That's when people began moving toward the main table. Callista took her seat in the middle, of course. One by one, chairs scraped the floor, dresses were smoothed, elbows nudged wine glasses. I waited until most were seated before stepping forward, gift still in hand. Maybe I missed something. Maybe my card had fallen. Then she looked right at me. Callista tilted her head, smiled the way a hostess might at a guest who brought the wrong dish to a potluck, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Your plate's outside. With the dogs." The laughter didn't last, just a few nervous chuckles. One cousin choked on a sip of wine, another lowered her eyes. But no one spoke. Not Mom. Not our aunt who used to braid my hair during church. Not even Callista's fiancé, who once helped me move into my apartment during finals week. The silence clung to my skin like humidity. I blinked once. My hands, still holding the gift, were trembling just enough to make the tissue paper whisper. I didn't say a word. I didn't ask why. I didn't ask who made the guest list or whether the chair had been left off by mistake. Instead, I walked to the middle of the table. I placed the gift down gently, right between the bottle of rosé and the sculpted centerpiece of lilies and eucalyptus. Callista's eyes followed my every move, lips pursed in that tight, calculated line she used when a meeting didn't go her way. I leaned in, my voice low, calm, controlled. "Look under your plate." Then I turned around. No gasps. No one grabbed my arm. I walked past the waiter holding a tray of shrimp shooters, past the cousin who had winced, past the floral arch, now buzzing with a camera drone. I didn't rush. I didn't cry. I didn't even adjust my coat. At the elevator, I pressed the button once. Behind me, there was only the soft drone of city noise from the edge of the terrace. My reflection in the mirrored elevator doors looked unshaken. I remembered the way Callista once said I was too much emotion and not enough spine. Maybe she should have looked again. The elevator dinged open. I stepped inside. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of her face, Callista's fingers hesitating above the edge of her plate, that forced smile faltering, just slightly. I didn't always know how to disappear quietly, but I learned from watching them. The trick wasn't in walking away. It was in leaving just slow enough that no one would dare follow. Instead of heading straight to the elevator lobby, I veered left, toward the far edge of the rooftop. The city buzzed below, glass towers flickering like 1,000 unblinking eyes. I leaned on the railing, letting the cool breeze slap my cheeks, anchoring myself back to something real. My fingers still bore the faint pressure of the ribbon handles from the gift bag. I hadn't even realized I'd been clenching my fists. From where I stood, I could see the side wing of the building, the gallery section, lit softly, lined with oversized portraits and stylized placards, the kind meant to feel permanent. Legacy. I walked slowly toward it, my heels no longer making noise on the softer wood paneling. I hadn't been here in years, but my feet knew the way. Before it became Callista's space, this rooftop gallery had been a rundown co-op struggling to stay open. 5 years ago, I'd negotiated the lease on behalf of a local artist group, pro bono, spent 3 months battling zoning laws, wrote checks when their heater broke mid-February. Callista had laughed at me then, said, "Non-profit stuff is just emotional clutter with no ROI." Now her face was on every wall. Callista hosting toy drives, Callista posing with a city council member, Callista beneath the bold serif title, "Legacy is earned." Funny, I remembered when she didn't know the difference between a grant and a loan. The image that stopped me cold was the main banner, her standing beneath this very skylight, hand over heart, with the words, "Preserving culture, one space at a time." She hadn't preserved this space. She hadn't even wanted it. I stood there, jaw tight, until a soft ping came from my phone. A message alert, group chat. One of the cousins must have posted something. It was a live stream link. Callista's speech, for those who missed it. I should have ignored it, but something made me tap play. Her voice filled the screen, smooth, warm, groomed for microphones. "I wouldn't be here without my family," she began. "My mother, who taught me grace, my brother, who taught me grit, and those who've stood beside me when no one else would." That was it. No pause, no misstep. She kept smiling, eyes glossy, like she was remembering someone heroic. But it wasn't me. I waited for my name. A flicker, a nod. Something, nothing. She never said Druella. I stared at the screen, fingers twitching. That cadence, those pauses, I'd coached her through them when she applied for her internship with the governor's office. I'd spent 2 nights role-playing fake interviews with her on our apartment floor, back when we both lived on boxed pasta and daydreams, and now she used my words to erase me. Back at home, I moved like a machine. Shoes off, laptop open, emails unread. I tried to pretend it didn't sting. I told myself I was too old to be this hurt over a speech, over a name. But betrayal doesn't care how old you are. It lands the same way every time, like you forgot where the ground ends. I washed a mug. Let the water run longer than needed. But my hand paused midair as I glanced up at the fridge. A small magnet caught my eye, green and gold, shaped like a palette. It was from the first fundraising gala I'd ever helped organize for the gallery. I reached for it, letting it fall into my palm. Behind it, wedged between takeout menus, was an old photo. A wide shot of the rooftop, the year we had over 120 people in attendance. Artists, donors, board members. Callista had only stopped by for 10 minutes that night. She didn't even stay for the toast. I zoomed in on the photo. There she was, smiling brightly, front and center, next to the donor plaque. Donated by CK Enterprises. CK Druella Cade. That was my check, my company, my donation. But if anyone saw that photo now, they'd assume it was her. The mug in my hand tilted, warm water spilling over the rim. I stood there, frozen, not in sadness, but in clarity. This wasn't new. They hadn't just started pushing me out. I'd been getting quietly replaced 1 inch at a time, first my ideas, then my labor. Now, my name. And no one noticed. Not because they didn't care, because they didn't think I'd say anything. I didn't vanish. They replaced me before I even realized I was being moved. The unsettling part? How easy it seemed for them. like a photo on a wall swapped out while you were looking the other way. It had been a week since the rooftop party. I hadn't spoken to anyone in the family since that night. Not a single call, not even a lazy, "You okay?" text. It was like the silence was by design, tight-lipped, deliberate. I filled the gap with work, errands, podcasts that rambled while I folded laundry. I even reorganized my spice rack, anything to keep from letting that ache settle too long in one place. Then, early Friday morning, as I sipped lukewarm coffee and scanned my notifications, a cousin tagged me in a post. "Full slideshow from Callista's big night, beautiful tribute to family." My thumb hovered. I almost kept scrolling, but I clicked. It was a link to a video of the gallery screen, playing during the final toast. A piano instrumental underscored a reel of old family photos. Christmas mornings with wrapping paper midair. Backyard barbecues with greasy plates and uncles in baseball caps, graduation caps, sparklers on the 4th, baby showers. All of it looked familiar. Familiar like a dream you can't quite grab. Then my breath caught. The rug. The one in the living room I used to nap on when I was 5. The curtains I helped Mom hem before her book club came over. Even the wooden tray with the sunburst pattern. The one Dad built me for art supplies when I turned 11. These were my memories. Except I wasn't in them. Not cropped out. Just never included. Photo after photo, Callista beamed in the center. Holding the baby I used to babysit. Cutting the turkey I used to brine. Even in the photo from that community mural project, I was the one who drafted the grant, and there she stood next to the mayor, paintbrush in hand, smile wide. My hands grew cold. I zoomed into one shot. Thanksgiving 2012. I knew that sweater because I loaned it to her, but only Callista was in the frame. Me? Nowhere. They hadn't erased me. They'd rewritten it so I was never there to begin with. I stared at the screen a long time. Then I set my phone down gently, like it could shatter the rest of me if I wasn't careful. Later that afternoon, I called my mother. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, all lightness and lace. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice level. "Mom, did you see the slideshow from Callista's speech?" A beat passed. Then, wasn't it lovely?" I let out a breath. It looked like I was never there, at anything. There was another pause, softer this time, more calculated. "Well," she said, "Callista had the files on her laptop, that's all it was." "But, Mom, there are pictures missing that I know existed. Pictures of me." Joyce sighed. "Honey, we didn't mean anything by it. It's not that serious." I sat down slowly on the armrest of my couch. It felt intentional. "Don't stir things up," she said, the tone slipping into that old polite frost. It was such a nice night. I stared ahead at the blank television screen, where I could see my own face faintly reflected. "I have to go," I said, and hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I grabbed my keys and drove. The streets of La Mesa hadn't changed much. The same gas station on the corner, the same neighbor still parking half on the sidewalk. The porch swing creaked when I stepped onto it, like it remembered me. But inside? Inside felt like walking through someone else's house, wearing my memories like a jacket that no longer fit. The hallway walls used to be cluttered with family photos, layered, overlapping, imperfect. Dad had refused to straighten any of them. "Memories shouldn't hang like soldiers," he used to say. I remember laughing at that when I was a teen. Now the frames were evenly spaced, matching, minimal. Professional prints. Callista with her niece planting tulips. Callista at a fundraiser with a check the size of a surfboard. Her smile in everyone. Perfectly staged. The photo that used to hang at the top of the stairs, me and Dad washing his old Chevy in the driveway, was gone. I kept walking, my pulse somewhere in my throat. In the living room, the stockings were already hung over the mantel. Early, but that was Joyce's style. Except there were only 4, Mom, Dad, my brother Graham, and Callista. The one with the beaded D I'd made in Girl Scouts, gone. I stepped into the kitchen, opened the dishwasher out of habit, like muscle memory still thought I lived here. Inside, on the top rack, was a mug, white ceramic, faded stars around the lip, the one Dad always poured hot cocoa into for me on snow days, even if it was just 55 degrees out. He'd never used it for anyone else, that's what he said. This is our cup, and now, used, still wet. Someone else had drank from it, someone else now filled the spaces where I used to belong. I stood there a long time, hand on the counter, willing my heart to quiet down. They hadn't just forgotten me. They'd filled me in with someone easier to love. Even ghosts get more room than I was ever given. That thought stayed with me the entire drive back from my childhood home to my apartment. It was like something had finally clicked, something I had spent too many years trying not to see. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to moments I hadn't let myself examine too closely, times I'd brushed things off, told myself I was being too sensitive. But now every thread I'd left hanging seemed to pull tight at once. 6 months ago, I'd flown in early for Father's Day weekend. I thought I was surprising them. Mom always said how much Dad missed having us all together. I drove straight from the airport, stopped at the bakery on Spring Street for his favorite cherry Danish. I still remember balancing the little white box in one hand while fishing for the house key with the other. The lights were off, no cars in the driveway. I figured maybe they were out for dinner, so I texted Mom and waited inside. I sat at the old kitchen table scrolling through social media while the pastries went cold. And there it was. My sister-in-law had posted a picture, "Family night under the lights." The caption was chipper, complete with emojis and hashtags. But what hit me wasn't the words. It was the table. The one in Dad's backyard, the one I'd helped him sand down one summer when the weather peeled the varnish off. Everyone was in the photo. Dad, Mom, Graham and his wife, even Callista with her polished hair and practiced smile. Fairy lights twinkled above their heads. Someone had grilled burgers. There was a fire pit glowing in the corner. And me? I was 10 minutes away and not even told. I called Mom. My hand shook so much I nearly dropped the phone. She answered after a few rings, her voice casual. "Hey, honey." "I'm in town," I said quietly. "I was at the house tonight. Why didn't anyone tell me about the dinner?" There was a pause, followed by a sigh. "It was last minute, sweetheart. You live far. We didn't want to trouble you." I couldn't speak. I just stood there, staring at that table on my phone like it had betrayed me. Mom kept talking. "It wasn't intentional. You know how things come together quick. And honestly, we didn't think you'd want to be part of a crowd like that." "A crowd like that?" "My family," she added. "Besides, it was Callista's idea. And you know how she is. Once she plans something, it's hard to shift gears." That was the first time I felt it. Not the hurt, but the replacement. Back in the present, I sat in my car in the apartment parking lot, keys still in the ignition, phone resting on my lap. There was a new message. From Callista. "Hey, we didn't mean to upset you, but let's not make this dramatic, okay? Don't ruin the vibe. You know how Mom gets." No apology, no acknowledgement, just instructions to be quiet. Again, don't ruin the vibe. I let my head fall back against the seat. My eyes didn't even sting. The pain was too old now, familiar like a scar you rub without thinking. Eventually, I stepped out of the car and headed upstairs. I unlocked the door, flipped the lights on. The air was stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in days even though I'd only left that morning. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my purse onto the armchair, and walked straight to the hall closet. It took some digging, but I found the box, an old cardboard container with a fading Sharpie label, Dad, Workshop. I brought it to the kitchen table and opened the lid. Inside were old receipts, screws in a tin, wood shavings still clinging to the edges of a stained cloth. Near the bottom, a folded piece of paper, yellowed with time. It was one of his old journal pages. I knew his handwriting anywhere. Deliberate, slanted slightly to the right. I unfolded it slowly, careful not to tear the edges. "Peace doesn't mean you don't speak," it read. "It means you know when not to stay silent." My breath caught. He must have written it years ago. But now it landed like thunder in a room too quiet for too long. I leaned back in the chair, the paper still in my hand. It didn't feel like a revelation. It felt like permission, like something in me had just unlocked. That night I didn't cry. I opened my laptop instead. I started a folder, nothing dramatic, just a quiet label, for myself. Inside, I began saving things, screenshots, photos, receipts, messages, not for revenge, for clarity, because they hadn't forgotten me, they had overwritten me, like a file saved on top of another. No announcement, no warning, just gone. But I was still here, and I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. If I had to become the villain to exist again, I was finally ready to play that part. But that readiness? It evaporated with 5 seconds of voicemail. The message came in just before noon. I'd been rinsing out a mug when I saw Miranda's name flash across my phone. For a moment, something softened in my chest. Miranda and I had grown up 5 blocks apart, shared braces, heartbreaks, hangovers. She was the one person I thought I didn't have to explain things to. Her voice came through with that familiar warmth. "Hey, just checking in. I saw you left early the other night. I hope everything's okay." I paused the message, suddenly unsure if I even wanted to hear the rest. But curiosity had its own gravity. I hit play again. "I think maybe you misread the situation. Everyone seemed happy. Maybe it wasn't about you." My spine stiffened. Now she knew. Miranda had been there. She had watched me stand beside the drinks table for half an hour. She saw when Callista humiliated me with a smile so rehearsed it could have sold mascara. She heard the silence afterward, felt the air shift. Now she was rewriting it. Not because she didn't believe me, but because it was easier that way. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't scream. I just stood there, one hand still holding the mug, the other gripping the edge of the sink like it could ground me. I'd been clinging to this fragile belief that at least one person in the room had seen what I did. But the truth was colder than I expected. Even she preferred the comfort of pretending. Later that afternoon, I found myself staring into the bathroom mirror. My reflection looked tired, under eye circles like soft bruises, jaw set a little too tight. I didn't blink. "Am I the problem?" I whispered. The voice barely sounded like mine. And with that question, the dam cracked open. It wasn't just Miranda. It wasn't just the party. It was the brunch 2 years ago, the one they said was to celebrate family. Same rooftop venue. Sunlight bounced off Callista's designer sunglasses. Mimosas flowed like no one there had work on Monday. I wore a sundress Mom used to love on me. I had even brought lemon scones. I remember standing near the edge, talking with an uncle I hadn't seen in years. Uncle Len, who always smelled like cigars and gave side hugs that made your ribs hurt. He asked how my job was going. I opened my mouth, but Callista beat me to it. "Oh, Druella?" she said, all teeth and charm. "She's doing fine. Just a bit much sometimes, you know? Always has been. Emotional." Laughter rippled around the table. Not cruel, not sharp, but the kind that lingers. Even Uncle Len chuckled. "Well, we all got one, right?" No one asked me if I was okay. I laughed too. That polite kind of laugh you learn in childhood when your name is the punchline and silence would make it worse. It took me months to realize that moment had carved a small hollow in me, one that never quite filled back in. Back in my apartment, I wandered toward my desk. I wasn't even thinking. My hand reached for a drawer I rarely opened. Inside, paper clips, old stamps, batteries I kept meaning to recycle. And beneath it all, a scar I hadn't looked at in years. My wrist bore a thin white line, barely visible now, but I remembered it. The fence Dad and I had fixed when I was 16. A rusted nail had caught my skin. The blood wasn't bad, but it had scared him. He'd wrapped it with a bandana, called Mom in a panic. But it was Callista who cried louder. "You can't die," she'd said, clutching my hand like I was already leaving her behind. Now, She couldn't even make room for me at a table. My breath caught as I pulled out another envelope. This one much older, its corners folded and yellowing. Inside was one of Dad's old ledgers. I flipped past pages of tool orders and lawn equipment receipts until something stopped me. Gallery lease fund, co-signed by Druella, $40,000. $40,000. That was the year I'd emptied my savings. The co-op gallery was going under, and I believed in what it could be. Callista called it a hobby with a zip code, but Dad had backed me. I'd signed the paperwork, fronted the deposit. Now it was branded with her name, her quote, her face on every wall. There had never been a thank you. I closed the book slowly and rested my palms on the surface of my desk. I wasn't asking to be celebrated, I just wanted the lies to stop. 2 days later, I stood outside the La Mesa Legal Aid Center with my father's ledger pressed tight against my chest. The morning sun beat down on the sidewalk, but I felt cold, like my body had already decided to armor itself. The woman behind the plexiglass barrier buzzed me in with a tired smile. "Room 3, she said, waving me toward the back hallway. Inside, the office was quiet, filled with paper, still air, and that familiar smell of old carpet. The attorney who met me was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense tone. She introduced herself as Mara, motioned for me to sit, and folded her hands on the desk. "So, what brings you here today?" I placed the folder down slowly. My father passed 5 years ago. I co-signed a lease with him, funded most of the gallery's deposit. But now, it's been credited to someone else, entirely. Her brows lifted as she opened the file. "Let me take a look." I watched her eyes scan the pages. My father's neat handwriting, my signature beside his, receipts, dates, a trail that had never been meant for public display. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "This isn't minor." I blinked. "Sorry?" She tapped her pen on the paper. "Your name was omitted from the final filings. That's not a clerical error, it's deliberate. You could have grounds to file a claim, possibly even regain legal ownership depending on how the transfer was structured." I nodded slowly, heart pounding, but it wasn't from excitement. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about being erased. Again, from stories I helped build, from rooms I helped paint, from a gallery that wouldn't have survived its first winter without that check from my savings. Mara leaned back in her chair. "You don't need to decide now, but know this. What they did? It matters." I walked out of that office feeling taller, even if only an inch. The sunlight didn't seem so sharp anymore. That afternoon, I found myself pulling into Mom's driveway, the same one where I learned to roller skate, the same walkway I'd traced after every high school breakup, and now the same bricks I stepped over to ask a question I already knew the answer to. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon. She was mixing something in the old yellow bowl, the one with the chip near the lip. I'd cracked it when I was 8. She never replaced it. "Smells good," I said softly. She glanced up. "Pumpkin bread." I nodded. "I wanted to ask you something." She kept stirring. "Did you know my name was taken off the gallery papers?" Her hands slowed but didn't stop. The batter moved in lazy circles. "Callista said it was easier that way," she said finally. "You were busy with your job." The words landed like a flat note. Dry. Administrative. "Easier for who?" She didn't answer, just kept mixing. I stepped closer. "You didn't think that was worth telling me?" Joyce finally looked up, eyes tired, voice even more so. I didn't want to pick sides. And just like that, I understood. She already had. She just didn't want to say it aloud. There was no argument, no shouting, just the soft scrape of the spoon hitting the side of the bowl. I walked out before the bread went into the oven. At home, I opened the desk drawer and pulled out the ledger again. My eyes drifted to the scar on my wrist, the one that once reminded me of pain. Not anymore. Now it reminded me of clarity, of how loud Callista had cried when I got hurt, how terrified she'd been to lose me. and how silent she became the moment I stood in her way. That night, I sat down at my laptop. Fingers trembling slightly, I opened a new folder on my desktop. I called it History Untold. Inside, I uploaded the lease, the ledger, my father's notes, screenshots, voicemails, a trail not of revenge, but of record, because they weren't forgetting me. They were building something on my absence. They built their legacy on silence. I was done handing them the bricks. 2 weeks had passed since I left that folder on my desktop labeled History Untold. It had grown heavier, documents, receipts, screenshots, echoes of a life I'd lived but they'd carefully buried. And then came the invite I wasn't supposed to see. Miranda sent me a screenshot. "Callista's hosting a brunch," she wrote, followed by a cautious, "just so you're not blindsided." I wasn't on the guest list, of course, but I didn't need to be. That Sunday I stood in front of the mirror and zipped up the simplest black dress I owned. No jewelry, no makeup, just me. Quiet, deliberate, uninvited. The rooftop venue was a repeat of the one Callista had used before, soft jazz spilling into the morning air, champagne glasses clinking over murmured congratulations, and a cluster of small-time journalists brushing shoulders with non-profit board members. They were all here for Callista. Again. I walked in alone, a small plain box in hand, wrapped in matte paper, no ribbons, no tag. I didn't look at anyone. I didn't need to. My heels clicked against the tile as I made my way toward the long table at the center of the space. Callista was mid-laugh, leaning into a man in a salmon polo shirt. When she saw me, the smile cracked. "Not now," she hissed, her voice tight and hushed as if I were a stain she couldn't scrub in time for the photos. I set the box down, right in the middle of the table, not in her hand, not on the side. Center. "You might want to open that before dessert," I said quietly. Then I turned and walked toward the edge of the rooftop, resting my hands on the glass barrier. The view hadn't changed. The air still smelled faintly of citrus from the hotel's lobby below, but something inside me had shifted. I no longer wanted permission to stand there. Behind me, a hush crept through the crowd. The pianist faltered, the rhythm slowing as heads turned. Someone had lifted the lid. I didn't need to watch. I knew what was inside. The first item, a notarized copy of the original gallery lease, with both my name and my father's clearly signed and dated. Next, a copy of Dad's will, handwritten, initialed on every page, mentioning how he'd co-founded the studio with Druella's heart, hands, and savings. Then, a framed photo. Me, barefoot at 16, sanding the porch next to him, dust on our jeans, matching smiles. And finally, wrapped in a folded linen napkin, a single name stitched in blue. Silas. That napkin had been folded like a leaf. Dad used to make them that way when guests came for holidays. Silas had been his middle name, passed down to me as a joke in secret. "You're more like me than the rest of them," he'd once whispered. I heard Callista's breath hitch before anyone else did, then the murmurs. A woman to my left whispered, "Is that her name on the papers?" A man near the press table leaned in. "Wait, isn't this place originally DK Studio?" I turned slowly and caught the eye of the photographer from the local paper. His gaze had shifted, curious, calculating. Before I could leave, I heard it. "Druella, wait." It was my mother's voice. She didn't stand, didn't walk to me, just called out from her seat across the table. I paused, but didn't turn. "I just wanted to leave the truth where it could be seen," I said, steady. And then I walked out. Not with a dramatic flourish, not with anger, with peace. Not the kind that demands silence, but the kind that begins with choosing not to stay hidden. I thought the silence was over, but they were just getting louder in the wrong ways. The following Friday, I walked into the La Mesa community boardroom expecting to feel steady. Instead, the air carried a tension I couldn't quite name yet, but I knew it was for me. The usual warm greetings were missing. Nobody made eye contact. The receptionist didn't even look up when she handed me a folded printout. It was a press release. From Callista's team. A family member's misguided attempt to create division, it began, has unfortunately overshadowed what should have been a joyful occasion. We hope the public will not be misled by bitterness masked as truth. My breath caught, not because I was surprised, but because they'd managed to make the lie feel like a community service. Attached were photos, some of the same ones from the gallery slideshow, cropped tighter now, more curated. You wouldn't have known I'd been there. You wouldn't have known I'd existed at all. I looked up slowly. Every face around the table was pretending to read something else. One of the board members, Melissa, finally cleared her throat and leaned in, her voice trying to sound gentle. "Druella, we're in a tricky spot right now. There's a lot of attention around this. The board just feels it's best if we reassign your committee seat, temporarily." Temporarily. That word always sounds so clean. I didn't argue. I didn't even sigh. I just nodded once and stood up, letting the silence fill in everything they didn't have the courage to say. By the time I reached my apartment, the weight of it all had grown into something heavy and invisible, like air thick with smoke. There was a small box on my doorstep. No name, no note. Just taped shut, plain cardboard. I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen counter. After washing my hands and setting down my bag, I returned and lifted the lid. Inside was my father's cocoa mug, the one with the small crack near the handle, the one he used to fill for me every winter with hot chocolate and cinnamon. I hadn't seen it in years. The last time I saw it, it was on the shelf above the sink in Mom's kitchen, behind a row of teacups no one used anymore. Now it was here. Someone had taken it from the donation pile, maybe the housekeeper, maybe a neighbor, but not my mother. That much I knew. And yet that mug, the tiny fracture, the worn glaze, the initials scratched faintly underneath, felt more honest than anything she'd said in years. I sat down and stared at it for a long time. No rage, no panic, just clarity. That night, I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone. I logged onto my computer and clicked open the folder labeled History Untold, and I posted. One post, 3 attachments, the gallery lease, dated and signed, my name as co-signer, a scan of my father's will, his handwriting still neat and steady, a note I'd written 2 years ago, never sent, about how I felt erased from my own family's history. I didn't accuse, I didn't demand. I wrote, "I was never angry for being left out. I was broken by how easy it was for them to pretend I was never there." That was it. I hit publish, and then I went to make tea. By the time the kettle whistled, my phone was already buzzing. By midnight, there were over 400 shares. By dawn, there were private messages from strangers. I know how that feels. My sister stole credit for my work too. My mom still denies what she did. Thank you for saying this. None of them knew me, and yet they did. By Saturday morning, a local writer had posted a blog piece titled, "The Quiet Ones Are Always First to Be Forgotten." And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel loud either. I felt heard. And finally, the plate they gave me, outside with the dogs, became the mirror they'd have to eat off of. And 2 weeks passed. In that time, I didn't go looking for anyone, and no one came knocking in person. But my phone didn't stay quiet. The first message came from Callista. Her voice, too polished, too calm, spilled out of the voicemail like nothing had happened. "Druella, we should have handled things differently, okay? I just think we both misunderstood each other. Let's not let this get out of hand. You know the press spins things." I listened all the way through, deleted it. Not out of spite, but because there was nothing there I hadn't heard before, words pressed like wallpaper over a cracked wall. Then came Mom's voice, softer, but somehow more cutting. "It's all gotten out of hand. You know how we are. We push, we forget. That doesn't mean it was meant to hurt. Don't let outsiders twist the story, Druella." Outsiders. As if the woman who carried their secrets, paid their bills, held their hands through funerals and graduations, was no longer inside enough. I didn't save that one either. Finally, Miranda. A hesitant tone, like someone walking barefoot across broken glass. Maybe we should sit down, just us, no sisters, no mom. I want to understand better, if that's okay. I didn't delete hers, but I didn't call back either. There are some bridges that don't need to be burned, they just need to be left behind. That afternoon, with soft light crawling in from the window panes of my new place in Solana Beach, I pulled the gift box out from the top shelf of my office closet, the same one I placed on that table weeks ago. Inside, I had repacked it myself, quietly, not for them, for me. The linen napkin was still folded into that delicate leaf, stitched with the name Silas, my father's quiet mark of peace. Next to it, a scanned copy of his handwriting, 3 lines that reminded me of who I came from, not just who raised me. And at the very bottom, wrapped in a soft cloth, the old mistletoe mug. The glaze cracked from years of warmth, the handle still sturdy, just like him. I closed the box, not because I was done with it, but because it no longer held grief, just history. That weekend I hosted brunch. Not the kind with white linen and PR photos, not the kind where people hold in their stomachs and practice compliments like lines in a play. It was simple, just 4 people, my neighbor Lori, an old coworker from the arts nonprofit, her teen daughter who liked books more than brunch, and a woman I met at the farmer's market who had shared a comment on my post. I've been erased too. I cooked, no catering. I spilled vinaigrette on the counter and didn't apologize for it. We laughed, not the rehearsed kind, but the ugly, beautiful kind that breaks open rooms. I brought out the old mug and poured hot coffee into it. Lori held her cup in both hands and said, "This feels like home." I smiled. It is. The teen pointed to the napkin on the mantel, still folded like a leaf, now sitting in a glass frame. "What does that mean?" she asked. I paused for a second. "It used to mean peace," I said. Then I looked around the room, at the worn rug beneath our feet, at the books I finally had time to read, at my name, on my lease, my emails, my doorbell, no longer an afterthought. Now, I added, it means I'm done asking for permission to exist. There wasn't a sound in the room, but it wasn't silence either. It was presence. It was something I built with my own hands, like the table my father and I once sanded on a Saturday morning before anyone else woke up. I didn't need their version of me anymore. I didn't need to belong to their story, because I had written mine. And sometimes, silence isn't the absence of words. It's the space where the erased finally write themselves back in,